The cabin lights were dimmed, but nothing could soften the tension spreading through the narrow aisle of Flight 882. Passengers sat frozen in their seats as a uniformed captain leaned forward, gripping the arm of a teenage girl who looked both terrified and confused. Her name was Alia Carter, 16 years old, flying alone for the first time, and suddenly at the center of a moment that would change her life. Alia had boarded the flight quietly, earbuds in, hoodie pulled close, backpack tucked neatly beneath the seat in front of her. She was traveling from Chicago to Atlanta to stay with her aunt for the summer, a trip her mother had saved months to afford. Alia wasn't loud. She wasn't disruptive. She barely spoke. Yet less than 30 minutes after boarding, 2 flight attendants stood over her row, their expressions sharp, their patience already gone. It started when Alia asked if she could keep her backpack on her lap for a few minutes because the space under the seat was soaked from a leaking water bottle. One attendant sighed dramatically and told her to just deal with it. Alia tried to explain, her voice low and shaky, but the attendant cut her off and walked away. Minutes later, another attendant returned, this time accusing Alia of refusing crew instructions. Passengers nearby exchanged confused glances. Alia looked around, searching for support, but most eyes quickly looked away. She felt that familiar tightening in her chest, the one that came when adults assumed the worst before listening. The situation escalated quickly. The captain was called from the cockpit, his face already hardened with irritation. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't ask for her side. He simply told her she was being removed from the flight for noncompliance. Alia froze. "I didn't do anything," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engines. When she didn't immediately stand, the captain reached for her arm. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Alia cried out in fear, not pain, as panic surged through her. "Please," she said, "I'm just a kid." The words seemed to bounce off him, unheard. A flight attendant stood behind her, blocking the aisle, while another passenger began recording on their phone. Alia's heart pounded as she realized she was being dragged off the plane in front of dozens of strangers. Shame burned hotter than fear. She felt exposed, powerless, and deeply alone. As they pulled her toward the aisle, a woman in the row across stood up. "She didn't do anything wrong," she said loudly. "You're scaring her." Another passenger joined in, then another. The murmurs grew into voices of protest. The captain hesitated, clearly not expecting resistance. Alia's hands trembled as she clutched her backpack. Tears streamed down her face, but she forced herself not to scream. She remembered her mother's words, "Stay calm, no matter what." Still calm felt impossible when adults in authority treated her like a threat instead of a child. Airport security boarded the plane moments later. Instead of escalating further, one officer knelt in front of Alia and spoke gently. "Can you tell me what happened?" he asked. For the first time since the confrontation began, someone listened. Alia explained everything through tears, her story tumbling out in broken sentences. Passengers confirmed her account. The officer looked back at the captain, his expression unreadable. After a brief discussion out of earshot, the officer returned and helped Alia back into her seat. "You're not being removed," he said. "You didn't do anything wrong." A hush fell over the cabin. The captain avoided eye contact as he returned to the cockpit. The flight attendant who started it all stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Alia wiped her face, embarrassed but relieved. The woman across the aisle reached over and squeezed her hand. "You're brave," she whispered. The flight continued, but the air felt heavy. Some passengers apologized quietly as they passed Alia on the way to the restroom. Others looked away, unsure what to say. Alia stared out the window, watching clouds drift by, wondering how a simple request had turned into public humiliation. When the plane landed, Alia stayed seated until most passengers had left. Her legs felt weak. In the jet bridge, airport staff approached her with a supervisor. They apologized formally and assured her the incident would be reviewed. It sounded rehearsed, but it was something. She called her mother from the terminal, breaking down the moment she heard her voice. Her mother listened in silence, anger building with every word. "You did nothing wrong," she said firmly, "and we're not letting this go." Within days, the video taken by another passenger went viral. Headlines spread across social media, questioning airline conduct and the treatment of Black passengers, especially minors. People debated, defended, denied, and demanded accountability. Aaliyah watched it all unfold from her bedroom, overwhelmed by the attention. The airline released a statement expressing regret but stopped short of admitting fault. That wasn't enough. Civil rights organizations reached out. Journalists requested interviews. Aaliyah felt torn between wanting justice and wanting her life back. With her mother's support, she agreed to speak once. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't exaggerate. She simply told the truth. "I was scared," she said. "I felt like no one saw me as a kid." Her words resonated. Public pressure mounted. The airline announced that captain and flight attendant were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Policy changes were promised. Training was discussed. Whether it would lead to real change remained uncertain. For Aaliyah, healing came slowly. She avoided flying for a long time. Loud voices made her flinch. Authority figures made her uneasy. But she also discovered strength she didn't know she had. She joined a youth advocacy group, sharing her story with others who had felt unheard. Months later, she boarded another plane, this time with her mother beside her. As they buckled in, Aaliyah took a deep breath. The cabin looked the same, but she wasn't. She had learned that silence doesn't always keep you safe, and speaking up doesn't make you wrong. When the plane lifted off, Aaliyah smiled faintly. What happened to her should never have happened. But because it did, people paid attention. And sometimes, attention is the first step toward change. The weeks that followed were strange and exhausting. Teachers treated her differently. Classmates whispered, and strangers recognized her face in grocery stores. Some offered encouragement, others asked invasive questions. Aaliyah learned quickly how public sympathy could feel just as heavy as public judgment. She missed the days when she could move through the world unnoticed. Her aunt tried to distract her with movie nights and long walks, but the memory lingered. At night, Aaliyah replayed the moment over and over, wondering what she could have done differently, even though she knew she shouldn't have to. Her mother reminded her constantly that the responsibility never belonged to her. Eventually, the airline requested a private meeting. Aaliyah didn't want to go, but she agreed after careful discussion. Inside a quiet conference room, executives offered apologies and explanations. Some sounded sincere, others defensive. Aaliyah listened, arms folded, heart racing. When they asked what she wanted, the room fell silent. She hadn't expected the question. After a long pause, she said, "I want kids like me to be safe." It wasn't dramatic. It was honest. And for the first time, she felt the weight shift off her shoulders. The meeting ended without fanfare, but policies began to change. New training programs were announced. Advocacy groups were consulted. Whether it was enough remained to be seen, but Aaliyah knew her voice had forced a conversation that could no longer be ignored. Back at school, she gave a presentation in her civics class about passengers' rights. Standing at the front of the room, her hands shook, but her voice stayed steady. Her classmates listened in silence, some seeing her not as a headline, but as a peer who had been hurt and refused to disappear. On her 17th birthday, Aaliyah made a wish that felt different from the others. She wished for a world where kids didn't have to prove their innocence, where authority came with empathy, and where dignity wasn't conditional. She knew change would be slow. She knew one story couldn't fix everything. But she also knew that silence guaranteed nothing would change at all. And that knowledge, earned painfully at 30,000 feet, stayed with her wherever she went. Years later, when she finally decided to study law, Aaliyah would trace the beginning of that choice back to the day she was dragged from her seat and forced to stand up for herself. What was meant to break her instead shaped her purpose. And every time she passed an airport, hearing planes roar overhead, she reminded herself that her story mattered, not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. As time passed, messages arrived from people all over the country. Some were parents thanking her for speaking up. Others were teenagers sharing similar experiences, stories they had never told out loud before. Reading them was painful, but it also made Aaliyah feel less alone. She realized her fear was part of something larger. One letter stayed with her. It was from a younger girl who wrote that she had been scared to fly after seeing the video, but seeing Aaliyah survive, it gave her courage. Aaliyah cried when she finished reading. That night, she taped the letter to her wall as a reminder of why telling the truth mattered. Not everyone supported her. Online comments could be cruel. Some accused her of exaggerating. Others blamed her entirely. Learning to ignore those voices was its own battle. Her mother taught her that public noise fades, but self-respect lasts. Slowly, Olea reclaimed normal life. She laughed again without guilt. She planned for college. She dreamed beyond the incident. The flight no longer defined her, but it remained a turning point, a moment that forced her to see the world clearly and decide how she would respond to it. In quiet moments, she acknowledged the hurt without letting it control her. Healing, she learned, was not forgetting, but moving forward anyway. And as she stepped into adulthood, Olea carried with her the strength forged in that narrow aisle, determined to make sure no one else felt as small as she once had. Her story continued to be used in training sessions, court discussions, and classrooms. Sometimes she attended quietly, sitting in the back, listening as professionals analyzed what had gone wrong. Other times, she spoke directly, reminding them there was a human being behind every policy slide. Olea learned that courage was not a single moment, but a series of choices. Choosing to speak, choosing to heal, choosing to believe that her experience could lead to something better. Each choice added weight to her voice. On the day she received her college acceptance letter, she thought about that frightened girl gripping her backpack on the plane. She wished she could tell her everything would be okay. In a way, she had. By surviving, by growing, by refusing to be erased. The flight ended long ago, but its impact never truly did. And maybe that was the point. Olea closed that chapter with intention, not bitterness. She understood now that justice was rarely instant, but progress was possible. With every step forward, she honored her younger self and those who never got the chance to speak. And as her journey continued, she carried one truth with her always. Her voice had power, her story had weight, and no one could ever drag that away from her again. The sky would always remind her of that day, but it would also remind her of resilience, survival, and the courage it takes to remain standing when the world tries to pull you down. She stood taller because she endured, and endured bravely.